All right, we are back with more NFL coverage, and in this one, I'll be covering all the Week 15 action. To get straight into it, starting out with the Falcons and the Bucs on Thursday, and this game was the quintessential match, the full essence of what the NFC South has been over the past few years. No bullshit. Because you really have to ask yourself, how is a game like this possible? Well, it starts with a few compelling performances from a ton of different wide receivers in both of these cores. It didn't get started that way, as despite a solid run from Sean White early and often. For the Bucs, they stalled out on their first drive, but they had their stars back. They had Mike Evans return. They actually had Jalen McMillan finally make his appearance this season as well. And after that drop, they got it going from there. Same with the Bucs. Same with the Falcons, I should say. Although they got it done in a completely different way, relying on one man in Kyle Pitts Sr. to take them through and give his enthusiasts an absolute masterclass of a game from a tight end to fuel the propaganda there. The problem started early for Atlanta, though, when it came to the fucking penalties. The amount of times that they posed their own self-inflicted wounds on key moments in a drive on both sides of the ball. I mean, they were making solid progress on this first drive after getting both Kyle Pitts Sr. and Bijan Robinson fed, and then you get back-to-back bullshit penalties between a false start and a delay of game. And it's like at that point, Al Michaels threw out that by the end of the half, they had at least a foul every single 3 minutes of the fucking game. It was that bad. It's like, come on, bro. You cannot make that shit up. And it just would not stop. As for the Bucs, though, they literally got into it on the second drive with Mike Evans getting himself a hell of a catch. I do understand why this was the matchup, because you had Mike Hughes go out early with an injury here, and he would eventually be taken out for the rest of the game. In comes the Mr. Irrelevant of the last draft in Kobe Bryant. And he struggled for a little bit to really keep up with Mike Evans when it just came to sheer size. I mean, there was a play later on where he was able to flip Mike Evans over as he attempted to catch, and that was a solid rep for him. But when it came to man-to-man coverage, they were going right at him every time. And it wasn't just Mike Evans. You had Ibuka also get in a hell of a catch here, and eventually McMillan would get in a pretty good needle-threading pass from Baker Mayfield to get down to the 1-yard line. They initially checked to see if it was a touchdown. He was short, but it ended up being Sean Tucker time regardless, and they were able to get the score from there. Kyle Pitts Sr. was on everything tonight. If you wanted a reason to suggest why he was a top pick in the 2020 NFL Draft, I mean, you really don't have to look any further than this game. They decided that with Drake London out, he was going to get a lot of the attention on the in the passing aspect. They had a bit of a weaker wide receiver core out there in terms of having David Sills V, even though he would eventually become important later, being one of their core guys. That definitely wasn't on the cards for them. But more often than not, Kyle Pitts Sr. was able to break through the defense and get some good plays. Like this touchdown here, he just loses everybody on this drag route underneath. It gives Kirk Cousins the perfect outlet, get the defense as distracted as possible, and get them out of element. He just walked straight into the end zone for a score from there to tie up the ball game. And then you just got more solid stops from the defense. Of course, the Falcons did themselves no favors. A solid Robinson run on this drive was compounded by a holding penalty, by a false start, and then to make matters even worse, when they were already in 3rd and long, you get yet another penalty. Just like that, they had to punt again. Now, Macmillan on this next drive will get himself another 33-yard gain down the field. As impressive as that was, they were limited to settling for a field goal, but the Falcons had an instant response, and that was the key to this. When they were not shooting themselves in the foot, they were actually doing fine. The fact that the game had been this close, despite, to this point, notching 10 penalties in the fucking game as a unit, was crazy. And some of them are just explainable. But Kyle Pitts Sr., again, just continued to cook up. There was a wheel route that he managed to get a 36-yard gain off of, and then they have ran this play consistently throughout the year, but they alluded to the similar thing on this next snap. However, with coverage being, in that same kind of zone, Pitts Sr. kind of hesitated on the route, smartly, opened up more space in the intermediate lane, and got himself another easy 17-yard touchdown catch to give him what is a career night, in the sense that it was his first time catching multiple touchdowns in a game. It was that kind of night for him. Now, the Bucs were able to get themselves in field goal range, and again, it didn't have to be that way, but you had D. Alford commit a fucking face mask penalty. And it was promptly followed up with Mike Evans getting up top for a 33-yard gain down the field to get out of bounds and eventually kick the field goal after James Pierce Jr., who would have a solid night against Tristan Wirfs Jr., even though they mentioned his amount of pressures against him was pretty low. You're dealing with one of the better blockers in the NFL. So that's not something you can hold too much against Pierce Jr., being a rookie in this sense. But he performed well in the game. Well enough, at least, for them to still compete. A one-point game, despite all of these miscues from the Falcons. But it would not stop. It just wouldn't stop. Even when progress was being made, they found a way to get themselves in as unfavorable of a spot as possible. It also didn't help that they just continued to get torched, with Emeka Egbuka continuing to put together a solid night himself, and Mike Evans once again just completely bullying Kobe Bryant at this point. That's exactly what it felt like. He, with his frame alone, is going to win that matchup more often than not, and that's exactly what Baker Mayfield committed to here. There's not much you can do about that. But credit to the Falcons for at least a brief second. They did manage to put together a goal line stand, and in fact, in goal-to-go territory, they initially forced 3rd and very long from that range with the help of Dorless and also James Pierce Jr. But literally on back-to-back plays, where they seemingly get good stops, you got 3rd and long, you look primed to stop them, and the pass goes incomplete, but D. Alford commits a penalty. Then Divine Diablo commits a face mask and a tripping penalty. In the same junction, you can only accept one at that point, and they used that extra effort to give Baker Mayfield a shot to throw a touchdown pass to Devin Culp, rather. Ironically enough, Culp hasn't really gotten a lot of attention this season, but in the absence of Cade Otton, he's had to step up. His touchdown catch would be the very first for a Bucs tight end this season. So that's a pretty interesting way to look at things. Nevertheless, they took the lead. It was almost inevitable at this point. You got grounding on Kirk Cousins, which ended up making sense, and they were forced to punt yet again. At least This started to settle down too, but A.J. Terrell Jr. also deserves a lot of just criticism when it comes to the penalties here. I mean, if things went a certain way, as I heard with a video that I watched, he was potentially due for 7 penalties by himself in this game if they had all been accepted. And we're talking about a guy who was the best cover corner for the team currently, especially with Mike Hughes now being down and you having to rely on Alford and Bryant to hold down the fort. A difficult task in and of itself. That just made it even worse. But despite a massive gain to Mike Evans, a different London, who was a defensive end for this Falcons team, would manage to get Baker Mayfield in the backfield and force a punt. It was looking prom for the Bucs, though, after a fumble was forced on Bijan Robinson to have the rookie and Jacob Parrish get the ball back and promptly have the Bucs, with the help of yet another penalty from A.J. Terrell Jr., ultimately get the 2-possession lead with Chris Godwin Jr. getting the touchdown catch and 2-point conversion. In eventually no time, though, the Falcons were able to follow that up with Bijan Robinson being able to bang it in the end zone after a few contributions from both David Sills V and Kyle Pitts Sr. And then the Bucs would give the Atlanta squad a little bit of retribution. All you had to do at that point is protect the football. The Falcons were beating themselves despite having Bijan Robinson get his 27th career game with over 100 scrimmage yards. They were beating themselves with all of these penalties. You did not have to do much of anything. Control the ball as best as you can, and you're good. Mayfield, within just a few short plays, got absolutely lurked by D. Alford getting up as vertical as possible in the air and lurking his ass to give the Falcons a chance to go down and respond themselves. And then the main two ultimately took over. By this point, Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts Sr. had accounted for most of the total yardage the team had accrued in the game. So you figured that this was going to go in their direction on multiple occasions. And when it came down to it, they leaned on the run, they leaned on balance, and they ultimately got Kyle Pitts Sr. to get a Moss on the boundary for a score, his third of the night at that point. Give him a hat trick, I suppose. And while they would fail the 2-point conversion, somehow, some way, despite accruing all these penalties. In fact, I'll get to the numbers in a second on that. Despite that historical context, they were well in this game. They just needed to stop. And they needed, for the love of goodness, to not foul. It's as simple as that. While the Falcons would allow a first down initially and use all their timeouts, they were able to get the stop just before the 2-minute warning and were able to get themselves the ball back with a chance to drive down and take the lead back. With this short of a lead, all they needed was a field goal. And while it was looking scary, they got themselves in trouble again after Jake Matthews committed a holding penalty. It got as deep as 3rd and 28. Think about that. 3rd and 28 off of yet another self-inflicted wound. But the Falcons, with David Sills V leaping over towards the sideline to make this play, ended up helping them pick up the first down, get closer to field goal range, and ultimately, with the game on the line, Zane Gonzalez would make a routine 43-yard field goal to somehow give this Falcons team the 29-28 victory. Somehow they pulled it out. Despite all of that shit going on, they got the job done. And afterwards, for context, Todd Bowles was seen just completely getting livid about this. And resorting to a lot of different expletives when it came to talking about the nature of the game. And to be honest, while some people criticize him for it, I honestly can't blame him for doing so. Because you don't get yourself in that position as a football team, up 2 possessions, and having the Falcons commit some of the most egregious mistakes imaginable and still come up short after having your defense give up something as long as a 3rd and 28. That is a fundamental issue with the team as a whole. And the Bucs, again, after their hot start, continued to just go on this deep slide. They can't seem to get themselves out of this rut. And sooner or later, they're going to have to. Because this result, once again, makes things even more interesting in the NFC South division, with them still having to deal with the Panthers twice this season before it ends. You'd think that in games before that, they'd at least try to clean it up to get a greater edge over them, but you're making things as even as they possibly can be, making those games even more important when they come. For the Falcons in this game, the numbers, man, I mean, they've been great for Kirk Cousins, who has had some of his best performances over the past few years solely against the Bucs, who had his last game-winning drive before this one against the Bucs in that aforementioned heater of an overtime game in the first matchup last season. And he continued that trend today, in the game, getting 373 passing yards on 68.2% completion with 3 touchdown passes. Bijan Robinson accounted for 27 touches and 175 yards, along with a rushing score. Like I said, Kyle Pitts Sr. had a career day, 11 catches and 166 yards for him and 3 touchdowns. Not, again, going to sit here and act like fantasy football is everything. But the man was truly going dumb. In some leagues, he dropped as high as 45.6. And in others, he ended up reaching an absurd tear of around 40. You rarely have seen that this season from a tight end, just getting fed to that extreme. And he was automatic for them more often than not. So much so to where the Bucs for a while had been trying to double team him. And they broke their own trend in the most pivotal moments of the game, leaving him open and in single coverage on numerous occasions down the stretch. And he promptly made him pay for it. If this was consistent from him, man, I don't think there'd be any doubt about his status as one of the top tight ends in the league. But of course, it's been a struggle sometimes just to get him the football. He can say that for at least one time in his career, he finally got it. He got it consistently. David Sills V was also a sneaky pull for them in this game, getting 6 catches for 78 yards. As for the Bucs, Baker Mayfield had 277 passing yards along with 2 touchdowns and an interception with 55.9% completion. Bucky Irving had 16 rushes for 60 yards, and Mike Evans had 6 receptions for 132. Emeka Egbuka had 4 catches for 64 yards, and Jalen McMillan had 2 receptions for 38 yards in his season debut. But the most revealing stat line of it all, and I just need you to understand where this is coming from. The Bucs, the Falcons in this game, were penalized 19 times in terms of accepted penalties. 19. And that would be the most in a game for their franchise history, the most in a game in the season, And the highest mark reached since the 2019 Browns in week 1 of that season against Tennessee. That is how historically inept they were in just being disciplined as a unit, as a collective. And while the Bucs were able to take advantage of that at times, the fact that it still came down to you losing the game this tightly, when you could have just as easily blown them out of the water, you can then understand why Bowles would be infuriated about this. And in a way, that does kind of come down to execution. There's coaching that ties into that as well. But when you take that into account with the slot that they've already been on, this was a recipe for complete and total disaster on that front. Like, the sky is legitimately falling down for Tampa Bay right now. They've got to get this cleaned up before they get into those games against the Panthers. Because if they're not careful, again, they are very much in danger of losing the division to them, despite having that hot start. That has just got to be so embarrassing as a ball club to deal with. Moving into the Sunday action. And speaking of potential embarrassment, I do have to start out with the Seahawks and the Colts. The fact that Phillip Rivers almost pulled this off does say quite a lot. Like, yes, I am elated about getting the win at the end of the day. That's what it all comes down to. Jason Myers is so fucking clutch, bro. Jason Myers is so clutch, man. What can I say? The man already has the most field goals made in the NFL right now. And you talk about him coming off a damn game where he gets 6, makes every single one of them, and ultimately gets the game winner in to move the Seahawks to 11-3. You have to respect it. But it's become a little bit of a theme over the past few weeks, I should say. Even when you look back at the Rams game, which ironically enough, the next matchup now sees Seattle take them on at home tomorrow, actually. Like Greg Olsen said in that game, field goals get you beat against good teams. And despite what you want to say about the Colts right now in their state, obviously things are going to take a little bit of a hit with Daniel Jones being out, and maybe they were at a little bit of a weaker condition with Phillip Rivers being in there, and I can get into that in a second. This Colts team is still solid enough to be in playoff contention, and you nearly lost this game. I can call it potential luck. Blake Group had never hit a 60-yard field goal before the game, but you still came that close to suffering a loss. That could be a bit revealing. And while the offense was okay at times, they got it done when they needed to get it done. But it's still reverting back to some other issues. I mean, yes, again, Jackson Smith-Njigba continues to kill the game. He had 7 catches for 113 yards in this one. And Rashid Shaheed and Cooper Kupp did emerge as some compliments. They both had 5 receptions, and Rashid Shaheed added 74 yards on the day. I'd say that's pretty respectable. But the rushing attack, it looked like it had been coming together for a few weeks, but then you drop right back down to this result having just 50 yards on 2.3 yards per carry. And there's a bit of cause for concern there. Like, if you're going on that kind of slip right now, as you're about to get back into conference play, that could become another issue. And while it seems almost inevitable that you have a player in Jackson Smith-Njigba who can get his, you do have to figure out a way to balance this more effectively. And when it comes to being able to run the football, the volume's there, the balance is there, but they have to get so much better with getting enough out of these touches. Because 2.3 yards per touch is not going to cut it. And certainly wouldn't cut it the first time the Rams spaced off against them. One of those, kinds of aspects that led to that loss there. So how exactly would that change if you roll into the next game the same way? That's just kind of tough. The defense was solid, and that was the Colts' game plan, working to perfection as they took a 10-point lead before halftime, a little bit. They still had good results. Nick Manwari actually finished with 7 tackles, a sack, a TFL, and 2 pass deflections. Ernest Jones, the 5th, had 10 tackles. And as a whole, they didn't do as great as getting after Phillip Rivers. That could be concerning in a way, but at the same time, given the connection that he and Steichen have, the plan was to get the ball out of his hands as quickly as possible. So you saw a number of different checkdowns for a while. Was tracking the game, didn't necessarily watch it live, but you saw countless short pass left, catch made by Jonathan Taylor for such and such yards. They were definitely relying on that kind of system, and even with some of the deeper plays, aside from one throw on a different drive where he actually got in a hell of a throw to Tyler Warren in the seam past Ernest Jones the 5th to pick up a first down for a longer amount of yardage. Outside of plays like that, it didn't really end up being anything too deep in terms of the depth of air yardage here. The leading receiver, for crying out loud, was Amir Abdullah with 5 for 32 out of the backfield for the Colts. It's so that was to be expected in a way. You can't really hold that against either team at that point. That is the nature of the Seahawks team. They're going to want to get after the quarterback. But the Colts are also well within their right to make sure that they utilize their other weapons as best as possible to work to Phillip Rivers' strengths at this point and make the game easier for him at this point. I'm telling you right now, if they had to move him around consistently, it would not have gone pretty for him. And they know that. So they did the right thing there. Jonathan Taylor, I will say, had 87 rushing yards on 25 carries. He was all right. But if the Colts truly wanted to win this game, they probably would have needed him to perform a little better. That's a testament, again, to the rushing defense of the Seahawks, still not allowing a 100-yard rusher in quite some time. Even with as great as Jonathan Taylor has been this season, that's pretty damn revealing that you can still hold both him and Bijan Robinson to under 90 yards in back-to-back weeks. I'd say that's impressive. Again, jury's still out on, how good the Colts can be now with Phillip Rivers, and obviously the Falcons are out of the playoffs at this point. But those two are some of the best running backs in the NFL, if not, depending on who you ask, the top two. So that's a good takeaway from this side. And of course, you gotta shout out Kobe Bryant for getting that interception at the end, even if it was out of desperation. That, by and large, ended up sealing the game. So, was it an ugly win for the Seahawks in potential inclement weather? Yes. 100%. I can't lie about that. But what I can say is that they got it done. They got it done. They prevented the potential resurgence for Philip Rivers here. And they got it done. You also have to give praise to him as well. I mean, it was not a belt the ass or so. Like, it was truly competitive. It came down to the wire. He hung in there for as long as he possibly could and got them within striking distance to win the whole damn thing. That's all you can ask for at this point. So he deserves a lot of credit for that. Alright. Moving on to the Ravens and the Bengals. Of course, the Ravens were really trying to stay alive at this point in the AFC North. I mean, they've still got a fair shot while the Bengals are eliminated completely and now trying to play spoiler to everyone else to make this even more mucked up of a division than it already is. Interesting thing to note early, they mentioned a graphic stating that the Bengals this season have been giving up 97.5 yards per game to tight ends, which is the second highest mark in NFL history for a single season. Yet another way to explain just how bad their defense can be. Normally. However, when they've played against the Ravens this season, when you look back in the first game, you know what they did to them there. The key for the Ravens was going to be protecting the football in this one. But for a while, their next step, their next biggest hurdle, was simply for them to move the ball down the field. I mean, they could not. Like, I will say that they got some solid returns early on. Rasheen Ali got them started at the 34-yard line. And still, because of them being unable to guard Myles Murphy on the line, he had himself multiple sacks in this one early, I think. And multiple pressures, too. Demetrius Knight Jr. was also able to get in the backfield with relative ease and sack Lamar Jackson for another drive-killing sequence in just the first few drives of their ball game. The Bengals didn't fare much better themselves. And it was unorthodox to see. I mean, yes, might they have been a little demoralized following that loss last week? Sure. You also saw as such from Joe Burrow when he came out in his presser, talking about having fun and potentially losing his joy, which has just become a trend. Like, ever since Jimmy Butler said that shit, you just got all these people now talking about they lost their joy and their love for the game. I don't really know how to explain that. But what I can say is that, at least for the Bengals, the one thing that they could bank on consistently was targeting Nate Wiggins in this one. Jamar Chase would, through it all, have a field day by himself, simply when attacking him in man-to-man coverage. However, Tavius Robinson, on a couple of great pressures that he would have, would get the better of Joe Burrow on multiple occasions, including this sack, to force a punt. And then you got back-to-back drives from both teams, resulting in interceptions. As despite a bailout on fourth down, the Bengals still got themselves in a different third and manageable situation, and Marlon Humphrey would be the recipient of a routine interception, to say the least, for his career. You have to credit Draymond Jones for tipping it up here, but at the end of the day, someone's still got to be in the right place at the right time to go get the ball, and Marlon can say that he was there. For the Ravens, though, you would have an ironic one take place with can't tackle Jordan Battle pulling off his own interception to get the ball right back for the Bengals here. Unfortunately for them, they would not do much of anything with it. It didn't help that they were already pushed behind the line to gain with a different penalty. But that Ravens stop would force a 3 and out. And then the Ravens would start to find their offense slowly but surely before halftime. So that's a promising sign there at the very least, as they managed to get DeAndre Hopkins a target, let alone a damn catch. Rasheen Ali would also take a pretty routine check down screen pass out of the backfield and all the way into the end zone with no one watching him in the same way that Mike Green failed to watch Jaylen Warren last week. Similar vibe there. They got in for the scorer to get on the board first. And ultimately, as they were able to force a different stop with getting great pressure on Joe Burrow to force multiple incompletions, and also having a penalty line up here, they would force the punt again, and the Ravens in no time would get Zay Flowers activated. He opened up the drive, streaking all the way down the field for a 26-yard gain, and ended the drive in a similar way, although Joseph Assad also bailed them out, moving them a little closer. Lamar Jackson chucked that shit deep and over to the left side of the field with Zay Flowers hauling it in for a 28-yard touchdown catch just out of the reach of Geno Stone on the safety help. I'm not very sure about what the case was on this route. It's like, man, you literally had DJ Turner II so far out of position at that point. And Geno Stone isn't going to be fast enough to catch Zay Flowers out in space or have the proper angle of pursuit to go and get him. And that promptly resulted in the score. And that would take it into the half, where I don't know what the hell happened with the Bengals here after this point. You'd think they would try to adjust, get some proper things going, and get their offense together after being shut out in a half. Would that last? Yes, it would. In the most awful, pretty sleep-inducing way imaginable. And, you know, for the football enthusiasts out there, for a true blue hardcore football fan, that's difficult for me to come out and say. You have to credit the Ravens defense for being able to limit them. And that's despite them being short, as they would lose their rookie linebacker in Teddy Buchanan, who was apparently the second leading tackler on the team, to an ACL tear, and he'll miss the rest of the season. Incredibly unfortunate. Yet they still persisted, got the job done on numerous occasions, and would not stop getting this Bengals offense off the field. It quickly became the Derrick Henry show once this occurred. And yeah, they just had a 2-possession lead. They only have 14 points. But at that moment, it already felt as though, like, damn, if they can get anywhere in the realm of 3 possessions, 3 true possessions, they may honestly be able to take this game. Now, luckily for the Bengals, they were able to force them into a field goal, but they just could not do much of anything. We got in pivotal third down situations, and they failed to convert for the most part. And while they would force another stop, the next possession would see them move with as much urgency as possible. Literally taking 7 minutes off the clock trying to move the ball down the field, as they had to work for damn near everything. And even then, you saw the signs of something potentially terrible going wrong. You had a fumble take place that the Bengals were able to recover. You had them get backed up in multiple 4th and decently long possessions, with Jamar Chase ultimately having to bail them out yet again, because that's the great caliber of wide receiver that he is. And then you had yet another penalty backing them up even as they got into the red zone. Before you knew it, it would be 3rd and goal from the 7-yard line. And this would be the play that essentially ended it all. As you had Joe Burrow trying to extend the play, I suppose, and he would throw the ball, but his platform was off base because he slipped. And even though that might have truly been an accident, the luck for the Bengals would turn completely sour, as they would have the ball go right into Kyle Van Noy's hands, playing out in the curl and completely fooling Joe Burrow in that moment. Then he subsequently decided to lateral it back in a play that you traditionally see in Madden, with different people trying to pull that off all the time. He literally is holding his arm out and hands it out to Alohi Gilman, and it's legal at that point. And Gilman just takes off the rest of the way, untouched, for a score to give the Ravens the 24-0 lead. So at that point, they didn't have to do anything on offense. For one of the few times this season, with a defense that has been much maligned, and with them still now being in a spot where they've lost core players throughout the year, even guys with Buchanan that show promise, now have lost him for the season. They were able to, for one of the very first times this season, lean on them. And ultimately come out victorious. As once Roquan Smith was able to get this stop on Samaje Perine, it sealed the game with the Ravens winning 24-0. Fuck a who they chant, they said. I was literally coming out after that game saying that, hey, okay, you face off against this team in a few weeks' time again after this, and you have them chanting that shit in your house. You need to do whatever you can to impose that same kind of will in Cincinnati, because that is the only way you can forgive a performance where you turn the ball over 5 times and you barely look like a competent offense against the Bengals team that had been shitting the bed for weeks on that defensive front. And they finally put it together. They got their absolute, unquestioned retribution against this squad in the most embarrassing of ways when you look at it from the Bengals' perspective. I mean, you had been in a shootout with the Bills last week, and you get held to absolutely nothing at all. Like, that turnover was fatal, yes, but even before then, you had nothing to show for what you were doing out there. Bengals fans had to be absolutely pissed, especially when you consider as well that there was a mandate, I guess self-imposed by the stadium, saying that they couldn't remove snow from those fronts. And so you had other people sitting out there being exposed to those elements and having no other choice to avoid being anywhere near it than moving the snow off of these surfaces themselves. You talk about a double whammy. You have the nerve to enforce that as a team, but then you also have the team going out there and doing whatever the fuck, anything else, but scoring on that chilly ass day. Man, by far their best defensive performance of the season. Even if you want to consider that, hey, they held the Dolphins to 6 points. Oh, we'll get to the Dolphins. That's a DZ. That's a DZ. But as for the numbers for this game, you had Lamar Jackson And this would be the theme for a lot of the different games around the league as well. I'll make note of that when we get there. But you had teams win in the most unorthodox ways possible. Lamar Jackson has typically been in this situation, but still, for him to throw the ball just 12 times, he completed 66.7% of his passes, had 150 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, while the team as a whole ran for 189 yards on 24 carries. Derrick Henry led all of their rushers with 11 for 100 yards, and for their receivers, it was really Zay Flowers getting those 3 catches and 68 yards and a touchdown, and Rasheen Ali having 2 catches for 32 yards and a touchdown. Roquan Smith also contributed 14 tackles. Alohi Gilman had 8. And credit to him, he had a few whiffs earlier in the game. He was flying all over the place after that, making the right tackles inside gaps, getting some strong ones later on in the game, and it culminated in him getting fed with a touchdown. You also have to credit Robinson for getting that sack and having relentless pressure on Joe Burrow the whole time. And as a whole, the team nabbed 3 sacks. But think about that. The Ravens ran just 40 plays compared to the Bengals' 71. And the Ravens still found a greater probability of getting in the end zone. A far greater one than the Bengals could even muster up in this game. It's just absolutely embarrassing. Looking at their numbers, it's all just rough. Joe Burrow had 225 yards passing on 64.1% completion with 2 interceptions. All 4 of his interceptions this season. Yes, he's been out for quite some time. That could be a little cherry picked. But all 4 of them have come in the last 2 weeks. And again, it works back into the same thing. Like, yes, Joe Burrow knows that those are decisions that he can't make. But this was also what you were trying to avoid. You literally repeated how things went or had to go last season just for you to have a chance potentially of making the playoffs, and you still failed to do that because you were shouldering so much of a burden on Burrow to make every single play. And there are going to be games where even if you ask him to do it, it's simply not going to be a guarantee. And this is the culmination of all of that. They couldn't run the ball effectively either. Just 100 yards on 29 carries with a 3.4 yards per carry clip. Not going to cut it in a divisional game, and it certainly wouldn't cut it in playoff football. But they thought they were primed to make a return there. Yeah, right. Jamar Chase had 10 receptions for 132 yards. Again, absolutely the bright spot here. There wasn't much else to look forward to in this. If you are a Cincy fan, it's as simple as that. It's incredibly unfortunate, man. They had to go that way. But this just shows how much more work this team still needs in order to get back to that, former dominance, I should say, in a way. Just something reasonable that fans can truly rally behind. Because this iteration of what's going on with them is 100% not it at all. All right, moving on to the Pats and the Bills as a bonus coverage game, and this one probably be the best one of them. I was zapped into the last couple of minutes of it, and by this point, the Patriots were down and had a chance to get themselves back in the lead before this one ended. Now, there's greater context here, and I can get into that in a second. But in the short term, unquestionably, for the firm control of the division title, because they would clinch in event of a win against the Bills on this day, they need to figure out something. And let's just say that they could not do anything. The Bills' defense was able to instantly force a turnover on downs. It was just awful. They had to settle for a very short gain on first down, and whether it was Greg Rousseau getting pressure on Drake May or having him just completely whiff back-to-back passes with trying to get Dravion Henderson out in the flat and missing, and then also having Joey Bosa get a well-timed deflection on him as the Ohio State man, of course, they ended up pissing that drive away. It wasn't over per se. The Patriots still had 3 timeouts, but you had to try to hold them to a field goal. That was your best bet. You could not afford a first down, or that was going to be the entire deal. And with James Cook III continuing to be a reliable force for them, a team who was already hell-bent on running the football, and a man who had notched his 11th game with 100 or more scrimmage yards, the most in the NFL at that point, he easily ate up 8 of those yards. So it all came down to a third and very short. And as I've consistently said, you have got to watch for Ty Johnson on the third and short plays, seeing as he's their guy when it comes to those specific situations. And when it came down to it, they ran a play that looked as though, for a second, they were going to lean on Josh Allen a little more in terms of running the football up the gut. But instead, they faked that and got a little bit of a split formation style run to Todd Johnson on a fullback dive for the first down subsequently. And with the Patriots having to use their last timeout, that would end the game, giving the Bills a 35-31 lead. Now, for the greater context, you have to understand that the Patriots were dominating. Between a pair of touchdown runs from Drake May and Travion Henderson also just continuing to be so damn good as a rookie. Another Ohio State man continuously making plays and getting long touchdown runs in this one to give the Patriots life at multiple points. But with his first one going down, they had taken a lead as great as 21. And it's been so automatic for the Patriots that when it comes to them playing in Foxborough specifically, they had a 120-game win streak at home when they were up by at least 17 points at any point in any ball game in that specific span. It was looking as though they could have put them away once they got up to that point. And mind you, that shit happened very early, I should say, in the fucking second quarter. They had a prime opportunity to win the division. They could almost smell it from a mile away. But you have to worry about finishing out a game. It is not always about how you started out. So that streak would end. And fittingly enough, it comes at, the Bills get the win at the expense of a team that already beat them earlier in the year. And in a similar fashion to how some of their other ones have gone, have to battle all the way back. But don't complain about doing it. Don't get themselves out of a complete and total rhythm when having to pitch this kind of comeback. They just find a way to get it done consistently. That's a testament to every single player that was involved in this. Not just Josh Allen, even if it's him leading the show. Like, you talk about being down and out potentially, and this Bills team went on to have a 5-possession streak of consecutive touchdowns. Consecutive touchdowns. Sticking to their identity, getting deep into the red zone, and leaning on that strength time and time again to chip away at the lead. To where the Patriots themselves in the second half got completely unsettled. I think it was mentioned that they only had like 100 total yards in the second half. And a huge chunk of that came on Travion Henderson's second touchdown run. Thank goodness for them. But outside of that, very little action took place there. And that could be a big concern. A tough way for the Patriots to end their 10-game winning streak. But the Bills have also been just as battle-tested. So they, of course, are going to make this AFC East division title even more intriguing. As for the numbers, Josh Allen had 193 passing yards and 3 touchdowns on 67.9% completion, along with 48 rushing yards on the ground. James Cook III added 22 rushes for 107 yards and 2 scores. And Khalil Shakir had 5 receptions for 65 yards. Dawson Knox had 3 receptions for 37 yards and 2 scores. And Dalton Kincaid had 3 receptions for 34 yards. As for the Patriots, Drake May had 155 yards on 60.9% completion with an interception and 2 rushing touchdowns to go along with 43 yards. Very unconventional game for him, to say the least, especially when you consider the complete and total drop-off. The interception was also questionable. I watched it in post. And, I mean, it's kind of tough for a second there. You think Mac Hollins has a shot at it, but he launched it so damn deep. And Tre'Davious White was ultimately able to work himself back into the play to get the interception. I don't know how much it would affect his MVP candidacy. He's probably still one of the top candidates. But it definitely hurts it a little bit, especially if you have Josh Allen pulling that off, I suppose. Travion Henderson, though. Man, you have got to love this shit. 14 rushes and 148 yards for him and 2 touchdowns. His second one literally saw him reverse field in a play that would get the Patriots hyped up in any other context. And if they had just simply found more sound play offensively, this would have ended up being even better for them in the long run. He literally is stopped dead in his tracks with a swarm of Buffalo defenders on the right side of the field, reverses course all the way over to the left, and is streaking down the sideline as Drake May, of all people, is out there getting in front of him and willing himself to throw a block. And I'm like, when I saw that happen, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of hyped up about that myself. You rarely see quarterbacks in this day and age willing to put their body on the line in that way. But when you have a man as fast as Travion Henderson is, trying to get out in space and get a house call, hey, figure you just have to do whatever it fucking takes at that point to get your guy what he's looking for. And that was the perfect encapsulation of that. They just needed a lot more offense to completely round that out and force the Bills into complete and total submission instead of letting them creep back into this one. Mac Hollins had 4 receptions for 41 yards, and Kayshon Boutte had 1 reception for 30 yards as well. Jalen Hawkins, the rookie for the Patriots, had 11 tackles and a pass deflection. Marcus Jones had 10 tackles and 8 solo. Jack Gibbons had 9 tackles, 4 solo, a sack, and 2 TFLs. And also Matt Milano for the Bills had 10 tackles, 2 sacks, and 2 TFLs. So a few defensive games and performances stood out in there as well. But ultimately that game was marked with high-scoring offense, and the Bills, despite being down and out of it, seemingly were able to call themselves all the way back into it and take advantage, inching that much closer to getting the division title and taking it over. As for the next bonus coverage game, You got the Commanders taking on the Giants here, and for a while the Giants had also been in a situation due to a couple of missed field goals from Younghoe Koo, who has now been waived by the team per a report from Fox Sports, and just some inept offense added in there. We're down by as much as 15 points. But little by little, they were able to inch themselves back into the game too. All of a sudden, this was a one-possession game with an 8-point deficit, and they were still trying to drive. Before you knew it, we got zapped into the last couple of minutes here, and Jackson Dart would get a solid scramble, even though he wasn't getting past Bobby Wagner on the tackle attempt. He got enough for the gain to move the sticks as the 2-minute warning was enforced. And from there, everything else just went to shit. He tried to chuck one deep to Wan'Dale Robinson. And while Robinson had a step on him, it was just too far out of reach for him. I don't know why Benogany on this play, the cornerback for Washington, even thought about flexing on him at all. Like, he was literally beaten off the press. He had all the leverage on him imaginable. The ball just needed to be in an accurate place, and it wasn't. Fine, fair enough. You move on. You get to the second down here, and then you have him just kind of lofted up in the direction of Antonio Hamilton Sr., which made no sense. Like, it was too soft of a pass. So that deflection was going to come easy. Same thing on third down. Like, we're trying to hit up Darius Slayton on what looked to be a corner route, and it was there for a second. But just another ill-advised throw, nearly resulting in a turnover, to force ultimately 4th and long, where you had Wan'Dale Robinson getting the utmost physicality on this route, and that would just be a tough break. But the corner was all over it, and ultimately that pass fell incomplete as well. So it's not like the Giants didn't have a chance, but man, between constantly having to be on the losing end of multiple fourth quarter comebacks to teams this season, but also dealing with things like this where you're in position to come through in the clutch and stall out like that, that's also a pretty tough feeling to deal with. But the Giants, I suppose, in ways, maybe the entire New York fan base is accustomed to something like that. Nevertheless, they would lose the game 29-21 to drop to 2-12. Yikes, bro. As for the numbers here, Marcus Mariota was not asked to pass the ball a lot. Same thing. Lamar Jackson won with 12 passes, and Marcus Mariota won with throwing just 19 times and completing just 52.6% of his passes, but having a touchdown pass on 211 yards as well. Ja'Cory Carski-Merritt had 18 rushes for 96 yards and a touchdown to lead a 145-day outing for everyone involved. Jeremy McLaurin had 3 receptions for 69 yards and a touchdown. And Deebo Samuel Sr. had 3 receptions for 43 yards and 43 yards. As for the Giants, Jackson Dart had 246 yards on 55.6% completion and 2 touchdowns with an interception. Tyron Tracy Jr. had 15 rushes for 70 yards and a score, while Jackson Dart also added 63 yards on the ground on an efficient 7 yards per carry. Theo Johnson had 3 receptions for 72 yards, and Wan'Dale Robinson had 5 receptions for 54 and a touchdown, while Darius Slayton had 4 receptions for 53 yards. Muasau also had 11 tackles. He has not gotten a lot of burn this season. He's one of their newer players as a rookie. And, I mean, hey, to have a game like that at that point is kind of solid, but would not prove to be enough for New York here. And then, oh man, This in and of itself made sense to be a bonus coverage game, but in all honesty, what you would lay witness to in that stretch is literally just such a gut-wrenching moment for a lot of different people involved, and not just fans of the one team, but fans of general football. Because, man, before it even got on, something happened. Something brutal happened. And while I would inevitably get into figuring out what happened in post, after that point, they had Gardner Minshew II sub in and take over. At that point, I was a little bit confused as to why. And again, my clarity would be opened up on that situation later. I'll get to that in a second. Gardner Minshew II wasn't doing that bad in terms of dealing passes out. Like, he instantly got Travis Kelce involved, getting himself a solid gain down the field to make it a manageable second and down, and would ultimately get the third down conversion to him as well, to get them in territory to at least kick a field goal, right? One could question their strategy to consistently pass, in a way, because, I mean, I'm not sure. Yes, they used their second timeout, but if you get a solid amount of yardage over the next couple of plays, like, you're very much in Butker's field goal range. Even with the conditions, and even with being at the Chargers' 34-yard line, this is still Butker's range. Yet, on second and long, they had no other choice but to pass, as they were now backed up seemingly out of field goal range given the conditions. And from there, Gardner Minshew would try to look for Travis Kelce again, but Derwin James Jr. worked the fuck out of him to end the game and give the Chargers a 16-13 win, officially eliminating this Chiefs team from playoff contention, meaning that they would not be a participant for the first time in 11 years, and the first time in the Mahomes era. And what a tough way to go out for them, truly, to get to that side of things just really quickly. I mean, the entire season had been filled with despair and misery for them at every turn. They could not do well in one-score games. They dropped to 1-7 on the season after this. Always knowing that they had a chance, usually, and traditionally in the Mahomes era, figured that they would come out on top time and time again in these situations. That failed to happen this year. And it was always something completely different under the same umbrella. The morale of the team by this point was definitely tested and probably weathered with a number of the things that it went down. You're simply trying to get back right, trying as hard as you possibly can to stay alive in the hunt, and ultimately, they got by teams who have been far more consistent than them throughout the year, who have been sound rosters compared to the underlying dysfunction that is seemingly taking place there this season. And also, injuries are a factor as well, which brings me to my next point. It's no secret that they came into the Texans game completely defeated. Definitely defeated, but also very much depleted on the offensive line. Very much so. And it was still that way. Not much changed from that week to this game. They were still dealing with all those injuries. But again, you have to play the team that's in front of you. You have to play with the roster as constructed. You don't have a choice. And while there are things to be mentioned in terms of how they should go about constructing their team in the long run through the draft and through free agency, they should have those conversations because it has not been pretty for them this season at all. And a lot of these fundamental issues, if they aren't solved, could prove to be even more detrimental to the roster than they already have been, especially when considering what actually happened to Patrick Mahomes. He was going down, being tackled by one of the edge rushers for the Chargers, and as he's hitting the ground, his knee comes into full contact and buckles completely out of place. And at that point, they knew it. With Patrick Mahomes trying to weather the pain as much as he possibly could, yet clearly sprawled out, feeling something so throbbing, incredibly difficult to deal with. He was laid out. He couldn't do much moving and apply much pressure to it. And he was ultimately carried off the field, with multiple people having to help him stand up. And then eventually, we were told that it was a knee injury, but per Adam Schefter in time, it was detailed that he had torn his ACL and would be out for the rest of the season, with the potential to miss some early time next season. Another follow-up to that, briefly, he did get successful surgery on that and a torn LCL. But just like that, with all that I mentioned that is going on with the Chiefs this season, between the questionable coaching decisions at times, between the injuries piling on, between the ineptitude in one-score games, and the ruts that they have had to deal with on both sides of the football, nothing else could have measured up to having your franchise man, your leading quarterback, your unquestioned champion, go down like that. Like that. That, as I said repeatedly, had to fucking suck to deal with. Had to. And the Chiefs as a whole, they're going to have to go soul searching. Truly. But you also have to give fair credit to the Chargers, who are now in position to at least get themselves a playoff spot, and maybe if things go a certain way, take a hold of the AFC West. One division that has been largely controlled by the aforementioned team. It's not been the prettiest for Justin Herbert over the past couple of weeks, considering that he had to get surgery on his hand. But 210 yards, a touchdown, and an interception on 65.5% completion is steady enough to right the ship and come out with the dub, especially when the Chargers defense got back to their early season form. For a while, they'd been playing out of element. They started off the season very hot on that front. Very fucking hot. And they'd been tested against a few of the better teams in the AFC over the past few weeks. They more than found their footing here on a day where their offense might not have necessarily been up to speed. And they took full advantage of the opportunities that they were able to create throughout the game and ultimately come out with a victory. They are very much here now. And while they have their own set of things to hash out, as long as they keep it going, they could potentially get themselves in the playoffs. As for their numbers, Amari and Hampton had 61 rushing yards on 15 carries. Rondé Gatson II had 4 receptions for 61 yards. Trey Harris III had 3 receptions for 49 yards. And Keenan Allen had 5 receptions for 36 yards. While Keandre Lambert-Smith, the nephew of Cam Chancellor, also in this game for one of the highlights, got his first touchdown catch in the NFL from 16 yards out in what would be his only catch. So that's also a promising sign as well. Derwin James Jr. had 10 tackles, 2 solo, an interception, and 2 pass deflections in this one as well. Jason Oweh and Tui Pelotu also had 4 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 TFLs, and 4 solo tackles each. Again, even without watching this full game live, who would have fucking thought that Jason Oweh would be pulling that shit off? It's crazy. They've got it all. And Dayon Henley also. Fucking massive catch to work, well, not work, but take advantage of a Patrick Mahomes miscue in the red zone as he tried to throw it up to Kareem Hunt for whatever reason, like he could get up that high. Nevertheless, he comes in there making a sliding catch, almost like a wide receiver would try to do it, and ultimately getting the ball back for them to stave Kansas City off. And that sequence right then and there would actually prove to be even more pivotal than the final plays of the game. Like, the entire thing works differently if the Chargers were down facing this deficit and having to score a touchdown or score anything while moving down the field themselves in the final few minutes of the game. Alas, that's not how it ended up going. And so, with that, as tough of a break as that was, we get an exciting game from the Lions and the Rams in the game of the week for Fox. And yes, this was around the same time last year that the Rams and Bills faced off against each other, and what would be an instant classic there. It's safe to say that we got something similar to that for the most part, and even that was not, I guess, without a little bit of tough streaks as well when it came to injuries. But in terms of the flow of the game, instantly you had the Lions go after Emmanuel Forbes Jr. the whole fucking time, as they promptly should. I mean, they had this man at times acting like he was locking shit up, and then I'm supposed to be convinced that the man has actually become a better cornerback over the past few years. Sure, maybe that has happened. This is still Emmanuel Forbes Jr. we're talking about. And when you have a cone on your roster, when you have somebody who can consistently be exploited from time to time, I don't care how the fuck they may be performing, good teams are going to find ways to consistently weed them out. And the Lions did that early and often. Jamison Williams was getting after it, and Amon-Ra St. Brown would also get a routine catch on him to push the ball down the field. The thing working against the Lions throughout the entire game, though, is that they could not establish the Jahmyr Gibbs dynamic. Their entire offense is working when every single one of their guys is posing as a threat, either in the backfield or in the receiving game, so that Jared Goff can perfectly distribute it around to any and everyone at any one point of time without you really being able to do much of anything on the defensive front to zone in on one person and take away that threat. The Rams made it their mission to throw multiple bodies at Jahmyr Gibbs, especially marked by this short run here, but throughout the entire game as well. And there will be moments that I'll explain that encapsulate that much better. But they, in short, and as you'll see throughout the entire thing, did not allow him to get going at all. The Rams have a similar dynamic of wide receiver with both of Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua. both of them being potential red zone threats, both of them being deadly all over the field. And in any context, especially when it comes to Pukenakua's physicality. In the same way that they were targeting Emmanuel Forbes Jr. on their end, the Rams were going right back to targeting DJ Reed Jr. And it broke my fucking heart, bro. The former Seahawk, who has been a very good number 2 piece for so many years on the roster, is now finding himself in back-to-back games just getting headhunted like it's nothing. And more often than not, these teams had their success against him. It's so tough to see. But ultimately, even with those things in mind, when it came down to it, they tried to be slick, getting a tight end screen in action. And this motherfucker, Aiden Hutchinson, worked Matthew Stafford almost as if he was a damn tight end himself. Reading it perfectly despite committing to the pressure the entire time. Went right back, snatched that motherfucker, and ran all the way down the field for what could have been a pick 6 if only the fucking traitor in Colby Parkinson didn't catch him. That wouldn't come to matter though. Instantly, the Lions would convert off of Stafford's first home pick since week 10 of last year and get a angled post route over to Amon-Ra St. Brown on Jacoby Durant for a 17-yard touchdown. Keep that specific play in mind too, as the Lions would certainly go back to that later. But as we get into it, like, both these teams were putting their offenses on display. If you are a defensive centric person, this game wasn't really going to be to your liking. They just started slinging the ball all over the place. And the Rams, with their rushing attack, were able to initiate enough balance to eventually get Kyren Williams into the end zone for a 4-yard touchdown run. The Lions themselves would get right back to moving the ball down the field. I don't know what made them think on 3rd down that you were supposed to leave Jameson Williams unguarded. And he promptly got an inbreaker with Nate Landman being one of the closest defenders in that area to stop him. You're thinking Nate Landman, a linebacker who has somewhat emerged as a pretty solid piece for them, given how much he just gets into these tackles. I don't know what made him think he was going to keep up with him in pass coverage, but that's besides the point. Nevertheless, ultimately, Montgomery was able to get the better of Forbes Jr. from a physical aspect as they continued to drive down, but when they got into the red zone, they had guys like Cameron Kinchins and Cameron Curl also step up and make good tackles to keep the damage of the run game relatively short and force another field goal. As the Rams would drive right back down the field with Pukenakua just again head-topping DJ Reed Jr. just because. And ultimately having Kyren Williams get his 2nd rushing touchdown of the day. But not to be outdone, man. So, we're not going to man up Amon-Ra St. Brown as he streaks all the way over the field on what would turn out to be a crossing route. Like, literally, no resistance whatsoever. That's bold to do that against Amon-Ra St. Brown, and they promptly paid the price, even though he bobbled the ball around a little bit. Fair enough. Got right down the field anyways, deep into the red zone, to give the Lions a shot at another score. And he would then, just a few plays later, off of an impressive screen route. You have a bit of a delayed block, but that's by design. He gets out and off of it, gets a spin move into the end zone, and scores again for his 2nd receiving touchdown of the day. There were not many instances of punts early on, but the Lions defense, even though they've also been maligned, were able to get one after Aiden Hutchinson continued to get immaculate pressure on Matthew Stafford. He was not getting away from him there at all. And ultimately, they were forced to punt before the Lions would operate their 2-minute drill to perfection. It was Amon-Ra St. Brown early, again, continuing to cook the fuck out of Forbes Jr. before ultimately having Jameson Williams, harkening back to the earlier play that got Amon-Ra St. Brown his first touchdown score. This time from deeper out, Jameson Williams would run a similar angled route on Jacoby Durant into the end zone from 31 yards out for a touchdown to give the Rams a 24-14 lead. But the Rams themselves, with Puka Nacua continuing to be the crafty wide receiver that he can be as well, got a 37-yard gain to get the Rams in field goal range and make this a 24-17 bout at halftime. It was that close of a game, man. And it would take something of truly drastic proportions to tip this in favor of one team over the other. You gotta look no further than the third quarter for this from the Rams' perspective. This was looking to be a shootout the entire way until that Rams defense started completely wrecking the fucking game. Completely wrecking the game. You want to know how much the Lions ended up doing in this entire third quarter to be fair to what the Rams were doing? Because there's no sense of me even trying to make that Lions-centric here. They contributed just 5 yards and no points with multiple punts. And the pressure that they were able to get on Jared Goff, the intensity with which they were able to limit Jahmyr Gibbs would ramp up even more as their offense decided to take full advantage of those droughts. Full advantage of them. Mevis would get in a field goal before the Rams ripped off 2 straight touchdown drives there, with Devontae Adams getting himself down the field on multiple occasions and ultimately having Colby Parkinson get a touchdown score. This one was a little controversial. I had to challenge it, and it would be upheld. I think what ended up happening there was that for a second it looked as though he caught it and he was down, but he seemed to have lost control for a little bit of time. Just a smidge of time. And ultimately found himself in the end zone, regaining control, and thus extending the lead there. Then you would have Puka Nacua get deep yet again, this time for 39 yards. And it was literally with Stafford just ripping it right through the seam because nobody was home on him. Jack Campbell was supposed to be watching it, I suppose, but he's not going to do much about that, of course. And thus, he would get right down the field. Also, eventually, giving himself a chance to truly be established into Rams history. With that catch, he would become the second Ram all-time with at least 100 catches in 2 seasons, along with Torrey Holt, who is still in pursuit of getting the respect that he truly deserves as truly. You just have to think about that. It's like, damn, this man, absolute legend, still not a Hall of Famer. That's definitely a surprise to people. And Puka Nacua is in that conversation already. Like, that's got to be pretty damn exciting if you are a Rams fan. Not exciting on my front. And not exciting from that perspective as well. Blake Corum would run for an 11-yard touchdown as well to make this even more favorable for the Rams now. They were right in it. And it looked even more promising for them as they forced another punt on the Lions. But they themselves, with the Lions maybe starting to tighten things up a little bit, would also punt. And then we get into the situation here where it's just like, oh man, we're trying that hard to get Jahmyr Gibbs involved and they're not allowing it to happen. This 3-play stretch, and I mean everybody got on his ass. This encapsulated the game plan in full. Right here. You got 9 minutes left. You're in Rams territory, deeper in Rams territory. You got quite a chance to get back on the board here and ultimately get some momentum back in this game. Nate Landman stuffs Jahmyr Gibbs in the backfield for a TFL, with Poona Ford also finding his way back there. They stuff Jahmyr Gibbs at the summit on second down as he tries to run it up the gut and get himself free, but again, didn't have it happen at all. And then this third down, everybody, Kobe Turner, Braden Fisk, Nate Landman, you name it, any defender you can think of in that front seven, swarmed Jahmyr Gibbs on this 3-yard loss, forcing the Lions to kick another field goal. And the Rams from that point took full advantage yet again. Now this did not come without a little bit of a struggle. Even beforehand, that punt drive that they had to deal with would see on the play before them lose Devontae Adams for a little bit. Shooting right past Meek Robertson down the field, and all of a sudden he just completely starts limping on his route and ultimately falls to the ground in pain. He had entered the game with a hamstring injury, and essentially he would re-aggravate it in that moment. He'd be taken out for the rest of the game with that injury, and while it's still something that might be nagging him at this point, they're working on it, they're trying to treat it. He hasn't been formally ruled out as of this point for the Seahawks game per Adam Schefter. But it's just terribly unfortunate to see that go down on a day where you had so much going on with devastating injuries already. They would overcome that, though, on this next drive, as they tried to, again, balance it out. Blake Corum has been a reliable complementary piece for them as of the last few weeks, and would get himself a 24-yard run to push them deeper into Detroit territory before Colby Parkinson would get himself in the red zone again and into the touchdown score from 11 yards out as well to make this a 2-possession ball game with about 5 minutes to go. While the Lions would score from a yard out with David Montgomery getting into the end zone, and even when Jahmyr Gibbs was able to get a few solid plays on this drive, even then he had to work for it. Like this situation, he had to stretch it all the way outside. He had to try to make multiple defenders miss, and even then waves of other ones were still right behind them, trying to get a hold of him. He tried to break loose, and he could not. They hung on for dear life, and they made sure they would get his ass down to the ground. That is how intense it was for them. And again, by that point, with that in mind, the Rams essentially iced the game just by running the football and getting all of the timeouts out of the Lions system that they needed in that moment. The Lions had a chance to make something happen, but it wasn't much. They were left with just 13 seconds, and they needed to drive the full length of the field. They definitely failed at that, allowing the Rams to win 41-34 in a shootout overall, but a complete and total lapse from the Lions in that third quarter where they could not match at all. They didn't score a single point and were barely able to move the ball down the field in that front. Rather pick up a first down at all. When you really look at it, it's like, damn, like, okay, come on, man. So, when looking at the numbers for the Rams, Matthew Stafford had 368 yards on 63.2% completion with 2 touchdowns and an interception. Kyron Williams had 78 yards on 15 carries and 2 touchdowns, while Blake Corum added 11 rushes for 71 yards in the score. Puka also had 181 receiving yards on 9 catches, the receiving yards being a tied for a career high mark for him. Colby Parkinson also had 5 receptions for 75 yards and 2 scores. Devontae Adams had 4 receptions for 71 yards. As a team, this was their first time since 2000 in which they posted back-to-back 500-yard and 40-point ball games. As for the Lions, Jared Goff had 338 passing yards and 3 touchdowns on 61% completion, while the rushing attack for the Lions, and this is the thing, man, they again want to implement as many of their weapons as possible and incorporate as much balance as possible to keep a defense on their toes. Sure, Jared Goff can have a day where he goes for this many yards passing. We want him to beat us. Anybody else but Jahmyr Gibbs. If we make this offense one-dimensional and not as reliant on the run game, we're going to have a strong chance to win this one. And what do you know? They held them to a combined 70 yards, Gibbs and Montgomery, on just 3.5 yards per carry, and ran the ball only 20 times. Completely phased them out. And that would prove to be a little bit of the difference. Like if they, again, you can't play that game all the time. But in the event that they were able to at least make them a part of things, it would have truly turned this game around. Wide receivers ain't complaining though. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 13 catches for 164 yards and 2 scores, while Jameson Williams had 7 receptions for 134 yards and a touchdown of his own. Credit to Jack Campbell for getting a 14-tackle game, and Hallett III as well for also nabbing 10 tackles and a pass deflection. But in a game where the Rams were able to at least initiate the balance and sort of dictate the pace after a while, the Lions were not able to keep up with that after a certain junction, and thus they ended up losing. Moving on to another bonus coverage game between the Packers and the Broncos, where the Broncos were now in a situation where they were trying to hold on to the lead, while the Packers wanted at least another opportunity to get themselves down the field, potentially tie up the ball game and take this to overtime. And at the point of which I got in, well, you had a decent amount of chaos going. I mean, Bo Nix himself damn near managed to pick up a first down, as you had Wooden trying to make a play in the backfield. He just completely fooled around with him. They tell you to slide. He ended up diving head first, but he was still short of the line. And when it came down to it, they had forced the Packers at this point to use all their timeouts and had a very good chance of being able to just put the game away, potentially pin the Packers deep, and take off as much time as possible, which they did end up doing. Only they wanted to say, fuck all that shit. We're going to put the game away right now. And they resorted for a fullback dive to their man in Adam Prentice. You have to credit Edgerrin Cooper for continuing to be a good linebacker in his role. He completely stymied him behind the line of game. And that gave the Packers a chance, if they were so willing, to get down the field. You had new life. You had over a minute to make it happen. It wasn't going to be the easiest thing in the world to drive the length of the field, but damn, you had a shot. They fucked it. What they proceeded to do in just the next few seconds left a whole hell of a lot to be desired on their end. Jordan Love did not complete a single pass And he had multiple situations where he just sent these way, way off. I mean, the one to Reed, for example. Like, he was getting pressured a little bit, of course. That is what the Broncos defense hangs their hat on. It's how they generate that many sacks. But, man, I don't know how he thought that Jaden Reed was supposed to come down with a catch that ended up being far too low to go out and get in the first place. Then you had a situation where Melton himself and Love again just continue not to be on the same page. And that ultimately flopped. Once it came down to fourth and incredibly long, before Jordan Love could even think about truly getting a clean pass off, Nick Bonito would be the one to cap the game off with another devastating pressure on his front to ultimately give the Broncos the 34-26 victory. As for the numbers, Bo Nix had 302 passing yards and 4 touchdowns on 67.6% completion, while R.J. Harvey had 65 rushing yards on 19 carries and a touchdown. Cortland Sutton had 7 receptions for 113 yards and a touchdown. Troy Franklin had 6 receptions for 85 yards and a score. And LaJordan Humphrey had 3 receptions for 42 yards and a touchdown. As for the Packers, it's just yet another tough loss for them, as they just drop another game that they had a realistic shot of winning. I mean, for a while, I think they were up by as much as 23-14. Yeah, they had a decent lead here with Josh Jacobs getting it done both in the backfield and out of it. And you still come up short. It's unexplainable stuff. Jordan Love had 276 passing yards and a touchdown with 2 interceptions on 60% completion. Josh Jacobs had a total of 14 touches for 92 total yards and 2 total scores, 1 rushing and receiving touchdown each. Jaden Reed had 5 receptions for 55 yards. Matthew Golden had 3 receptions for 55 yards, and Luke Musgrave had 4 receptions for 52 yards. The biggest takeaway from this game would be yet another injury, as it would be detailed first by Pro Football Talk that Micah Parsons was feared to have suffered a torn ACL in this game and was taken out for the rest of it, of course, potentially with a chance to miss the rest of the season. And it's like, that would just be tough for a team that had invested that much in Micah Parsons and had been getting a great return on that investment with how Micah Parsons had been performing throughout the entire season and boosting up the force that defensive line has on their end. Legitimately a game wrecker and a complete distributor of pressure when it came to being able to absorb all of it and still generate it while getting other people fed. Like, you could find it very difficult to supplement that with the roster that they have. But regardless, you're losing a quality player here if that is the case. Now, I wanted to wait to see if this was confirmed or not. And eventually, per Adam Schefter, it would be detailed that yes, he did in fact and was confirmed to have torn his ACL in the game and will miss the rest of the season. In the short term, it could completely hurt the Packers. I don't really think that's difficult to see or say. You just hope he is able to recover in time from that. It just adds yet another one to a day that, again, was just littered with so many weird and untimely injuries. Like, it just... man, it was rough to see that, honestly. Like, I can't even lie to you, man. But the Packers, again, even with that, still have a shot to fight. And it's going to be important for them to continue displaying that. You don't want to get yourself in a spot where you just completely punt the season away because of the loss of a single player. You got to try to figure out different ways to move on. And admittedly, they'd have to get a little creative with being able to put together their own defensive strategy, centering around other players potentially, or a buying committee system if they so choose, depending on what that looks like. But man, oh man. Moving on to the Vikings and the Cowboys, which ended up being the Sunday Night Football match, interestingly enough. And I was wondering why in the world, for a while, they didn't elect to just flex this fucking game out for something else. Like, seriously, I was not expecting much from this. And little did my ass know that this would actually be one of the better games of the day. A day that saw a few competitive games like this one, and then just some other blowouts. But in all seriousness, it would start out fittingly with J.J. McCarthy having a pass tipped up by... literally having a pass getting tipped up by Donovan Wilson into an interception from Quinnen Williams to start out the game within just the first few plays. I don't know what's more surprising following this, though. The fact that the Vikings actually managed to do okay enough on defense to sustain that, or the fact that it took the Cowboys 5 minutes and 39 seconds to drive 35 yards after this. Yes, that drive was that long. At least they got it done, and at least Javonte Williams was able to punch it in for a touchdown. But that kind of shit right there, it's like, okay. Sure, man. Sure. Kenny Clark, man. Look, even if y'all don't think that he's doing much with the Cowboys, man, I guess he still had some bad blood on Aaron Jones Sr., man. He threw his ass straight to the ground and also just bullied the hell out of center Ryan Kelly to get this TFL here. And it backed up Minnesota for a little while, although they were still able to overcome it for briefly enough. But once again, with Siobhan Revel Jr. this time, helping in run support and getting another TFL on Aaron Jones Sr., they'd be forced to punt. The Cowboys themselves would end up going 3-and-out as we'd continue the same song and dance with George Pickens this week. To kind of at least put this into perspective just briefly, Pickens would be targeted a decent amount of times and didn't come up with anything. There would also be moments where, again, he continued to look disengaged throughout the game, with the ball not going his way. And it all culminated in Hunter Lepke, who would then subsequently go out with injury later in the game, would long a catch before George Pickens even got one. And this is a man who, again, is supposed to be a complementary piece alongside CeeDee Lamb. So at that point, I still just have to ask, like, what the hell is going on? You cannot make that up at all. After that possession, the Vikings were able to get something going a little bit, with them having a good swing route out to Aaron Jones Sr. for 18 yards. And then Jalen Naylor, of all people, getting on a sort of burst route over to the corner. He gets the leverage on Deron Bland and hauls in a hell of a catch on the sideline. He's kind of down for a second, potentially injured, but he got back up and ended up returning in the game. Nevertheless, that entire sequence was impressive from him, and he would tie up the ballgame there. The Cowboys themselves would be forced to respond, and, CeeDee Lamb was the one continuously answering the call. It was also Ryan Flanoy continuing what has been a solid past few weeks for him And through all of that, Malik Davis would be the one to punch it in for a touchdown. The Vikings, man, they have got to get this shit sorted out, man. Look, some of the plays that J.J. McCarthy made throughout the rest of the game actually ended up being okay. But few of them, outside of one that stands out, truly involved Justin Jefferson in the best way imaginable. Now, yes, that's been the theme of the season. That's been the theme of the last 2 weeks for a man combining to have just 4 catches, 15 yards in the last 2 games is very uncharacteristic. And while they would get a good start initiating the run, while they'd even have Jordan Addison get down the field deep for a 58-yard catch, might not have been the most accurate ball, but he could still run over it, adjust back to it, and streak on down to go territory from there, even with those in mind. Justin Jefferson got multiple targets on this drive, and they could not reach him at all. They were so far out of the realm of possibility and viability for him to even catch them. They just did not have that in sync at all. Even on this 2nd and goal, you have a potential out route taking place here, and he just misses him completely. They could not get this sorted out throughout the entire game. And it's probably pissing Justin Jefferson off at this point. I wouldn't be surprised. Then they want to make so much light of this. J.J. McCarthy would get a good fake and scramble over to the left side of the field for a touchdown on what was essentially a fake dive, pretty much. We've seen Peyton Manning do a similar thing. You gotta have a good amount of deception involved in the play to execute it. And you have to credit the scheme there for getting it done. But then you have J.J. McCarthy gritty into the end zone, essentially. Again, sure, it's a joking matter. You can make light of that and whatever. But as I consistently reiterated, you'd actually want to see Justin Jefferson be able to pull that off and do his own dance after getting a nice catch for a touchdown. Maybe you got to figure out a different way to try to get him fed throughout a game, and then we can start having this conversation. Meanwhile, you literally have him just literally struggling to have any sort of chemistry with you right now. That needs to get sorted out in time. Like, you don't have your unquestioned franchise guy sitting out and uninvolved in these plays like that. They've needed to for the longest time get that sorted out. So it's time. As for the Cowboys, they themselves would have a few freak situations happen. Think about this. Brandon Aubrey missed a 51-yard field goal on this drive. Yes, the Vikings defense ultimately tightened up with Jonathan Grenard and Javon Hargrave combining for a sack on Dak Prescott to force them into it in the first place. But Brandon Aubrey, literally just last week, became the first kicker in NFL history to get 3 different 50-yard field goals. We know about how strong the man's leg is and about how unreal his range is. And he missed something that's normally a routine for him. But again, that's just one kick. Maybe there's not much to make of that there. Both teams would respond to each other with a pair of field goals. Shout out to Will Reichert. As they would enter the half tied at 17 all. Kevontae Turpin actually got them started out in the second half with a pretty great return. But ultimately, you would get down into territory following some impressive improv to Luke Schoonmaker of all tight ends, right? They'd be stuffed very short of the first down line. They tried to get Kevontae Turpin out in space, and they were all over that shit. Granted, they mentioned there was a little bit of a miscommunication on his end. he misread the assignment on the play, and maybe that could have been the determining factor behind it. Nevertheless, it cost them as they were settle for a chip shot, but still take a lead. You're still in the clear, I guess. And hey, you force a 3-and-out on the Vikings' first possession, with Ejiraku and Odigizua keeping Aaron Jones' gain relatively short and failing to incorporate Naylor on both of these passes consecutively. The Cowboys would have a chance to double dip potentially, and they nearly did. It helped that they got a 30-yard gain from CeeDee Lamb instantly and started to incorporate Javonte Williams' power far more into the offense. However, with a pair of brutal penalties, including a damn delay of game, tacked on after a false start, and after they'd somewhat gotten closer to it, potentially contemplating going for it in that situation, they had no choice but to kick the field goal. Just letting the Vikings linger around with field after field goal, though, and ultimately the Vikings made them pay for it by going down and driving to get themselves on the board with a touchdown. TJ Hawkinson might very well be back as a weapon in his own right. So that's great to see. I mean, this was a hell of a pass by J.J. McCarthy when you look at it. Like, it was right in the seam, a tighter window to deal with, and he got it right in there to him with the velocity that you would need. Yet on the very next play, he can't hit Justin Jefferson for shit. Jalen Naylor still getting fed at this point, getting down for a 23-yard gain. And, I mean, hey, there was a bit of promise when J.J. McCarthy managed to get a very quick slant with a similar kind of speed through the Cowboys defense. He actually caught the ball and got the first down. Maybe there's progress. Maybe he's learning. He promptly threw another incomplete pass his way in what was likely going to be a fade situation to go up and trust your number one guy. Definitely didn't work. But they would settle for C.J. Ham getting in the end zone for a touchdown. And he gritty too. Again, we want Justin Jefferson to be doing that shit though. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what we want to see. Y'all gotta help him out. At this point, the Cowboys had a solid drive down the field themselves to get into field goal range, which again, even though it looks to be deeper out, Brandon Aubrey makes a killing here. So what if Andrew Von Gonkel and Jonathan Grenard got Dak Prescott in the backfield again? It don't matter. He missed from 59 yards out. He missed multiple field goals in a game for what would be the third time in his career. Again, it rarely happens, and even he was in frustration about it. It's like, I guess you're so accustomed to seeing him make damn near everything from long range. And it really catches you by surprise when he doesn't make it. But that is the nature of the kicking experience at times. You can't always assume that everything is automatic, I suppose. And with that, the Cowboys would just be out of luck. I mean, those are 6 points that are left on the board. And man, in what would be an 8-point ball game eventually, given the fact that the Vikings would get another touchdown pass to Jalen Naylor from 4 yards out this time, and eventually kick a field goal to go up by 11, man, if you make those couple other field goals, all of a sudden, the final drive of the Cowboys could look completely different. Instead, they were forced to respond with a quick field goal because by that point, the Vikings had smartly gone as conservative as possible, making sure that the Cowboys burned a good portion of their timeouts and made sure that they got it past the 2-minute warning before ultimately making their decision and having the Cowboys need to go down and respond, although they didn't manage it well. They took off in a crazy amount of time. They had just 23 seconds left when they kicked this Brandon Aubrey field goal. And you're relying on a lot here to get it back. Now, hey, Josh Oliver would secure the onside kick, and the Vikings would get the 34-26 win against the Cowboys, potentially eliminating them in terms of different kinds of paths to the playoffs, eliminating multiple avenues for them. So, while, hey, that's unfortunate for the Cowboys, like, that is crazy when you think about it. It is crazy when you think about it. Oh, I mean, it's like, we figured that the schedule was going to be a tough one for them. We couldn't have assumed that they were going to run the table the entire time, but it's like, damn, they lost their games. Both of their games in this stretch to a Lions team who is still hanging in the balance of a playoff spot, even though they're a respectable opponent. And then this Vikings team that might not really be in the conversation themselves, given how great some of the other wildcard teams in the NFC are right now. So it's crazy to see that. But hey, the Vikings can say they got it done. J.J. McCarthy had 250 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, along with an interception on 62.5% completion. As a team, the Vikings didn't run the ball the best. They had just 77 yards on 2.8 yards per carry, but they did have multiple touchdown runs. T.J. Hockenson had 4 receptions for 66 yards. Jordan Addison had 2 receptions for 66 yards. And Jalen Naylor had 3 receptions for 47 yards and 2 touchdowns. While Blake Cashman added 11 tackles and a pass deflection. As for the Cowboys, Dak Prescott had 294 yards on 60.5% completion. Javonte Williams had 15 rushes for 91 yards and a touchdown. And Malik Davis had 8 rushes for 21 yards and a touchdown, while CeeDee Lamb had 6 receptions for 111 yards. Brian Flournoy had 4 receptions for 40 yards. And George Pickens had 3 receptions for 33 yards. Jeez, bro. Quick note about Sunday. Well, I guess just generally at this point, including Thursday Night Football, the single week mark of 6 different 10-point comeback wins by different teams would be tied for the most in NFL history in that span. It's happened a few other times. I think it happened as most recently as a few years back in like 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And hey, through it all, it had been a wild day of sorts, but just as much as that Vikings game would not prove to have that result, this fucking game, between the Steelers and the Dolphins on Monday Night Football would not go that way either. I don't even really think that there is... Even if I explain the flow of the game to you, which is probably going to happen, you aren't going to be surprised at the result. You aren't going to be. It was cold as dirt in Pittsburgh. It was like 18-degree weather. The lakes were frozen over. There was a ton of snow at that point. And when the Dolphins had gotten in town, they were damn near reaching blizzard territory. It was just completely blanketed with that precipitation all over the place. And these players had the gall to go out in it and practice. I don't necessarily say that as a bad thing. They have to prepare for the game somehow. But it's clear that over the past few years, they have a propensity to underperform or barely perform at all when it comes to them being in weather that cold. In fact, they entered this game losing their last 13 matches in sub 40 degree weather. Even if we want to call these allegations and potential stereotypes, it is true that they, as a team, as a culture, they don't know what it means to go into uncharted territory in the cold of the winter, in December or January, and play hard-nosed football to pull out contested matches, and have thrived mostly over the past few years in their wins coming in the early season, where the conditions are a lot more conducive to their success, their pursuit of capitalizing on their speed and the short game to open up a number of explosive plays down the field strategically. That is how they've run their team over the past few years under Mike McDaniel. And they were trying to prove a point. Of course, they were trying to knock out walkthroughs and things like that. You can't question their desire to be as prepared for the game as possible. But when it came to trying to shake off that narrative, they couldn't. They couldn't do it to save themselves. And it's crazy, too. The Dolphins, if anything, have been a little more accustomed to Monday Night Football. This would be their 91st Monday Night Football appearance, which is the most in NFL history. But they did not play with that kind of intensity when this mattered. And, it all starts out with this. I mean, yes, they got some solid runs per Davon Achane, especially in the first half. But this man, Tua Tagovailoa, would be intercepted after getting a good in-breaking route to Jalen Waddle. Just the play earlier, managed to underthrow it and got picked off by newly acquired Asante Samuel Jr., giving him his 15th interception this season, which is the most in the league. But to add even more context, and this is just the most aggressive violation you can have. They mentioned a graphic, stating that all 15 of Tagovailoa's interceptions this season had come against the zone. All 15 of his interceptions against one type of coverage that, even though you might have some success in, even if interceptions are in everything, you legitimately have struggled for the longest time to read zone defenses. If that is a situation that you are finding yourself in as a quarterback, and teams are not shying away from running that shit on you because they know you through watching film at this point. Know that you can't do shit about it to counter it effectively enough. That shit is crazy. Crazy, man. What you can say, at least as a positive for the Dolphins, is that they did hold strong for a while. They did hold strong. And same with the Steelers. They were able to make things a little uncomfortable for Aaron Rodgers, not giving him all the outlets that he wanted to, although he was able to hit DK Metcalf up for a 22-yard gain eventually, later on one of their drives. But when we got into closer territory, they limited the run as much as they could and were able to get Jordan Brooks to sack Aaron Rodgers behind the backfield for a tough out. They also forced a 3-and-out on the Steelers later in the second quarter. But their offense just could barely find enough juice to move down the field up until a long 24-yard pass to Davon Achane out of the backfield with him literally having to go on the scramble drill. And at least Davon Achane had created enough space up to that point simply because no one was watching him out of the backfield, which is dumb. He was able to hot point the ball, but in other contexts, again, it's like, yo, keep the ball level to the ground so the man doesn't suffer an injury. Even with that, they were stuffed. Patrick Queen had his moments of just bitching and trying to talk like he's a villain, which, again, is just always annoying. But I will say he made a few good plays in this game. This stuff saw him completely fill the gap and run right through it, right into Ollie Gordon II, and tackle him for a 4-yard loss, to the point where Ollie Gordon II himself had to be taken out of the game with injury. And the Dolphins would kick a field goal to take a brief lead. Shockingly, as Riley Patterson would, for the very first time in his overall career, cross, or at least be at the 50% threshold for field goals longer than 50 yards. I was shocked to see it went in, especially given the conditions at the time. He is known for not really having a powerful leg like that. To have him cash that in and also be 2 of 3 on the season in those situations is pretty damn surprising. But the Steelers would follow that right up and never look back with just an absolute tear on the offensive end. One of the best that they've had in a while. In fact, they would go for a streak of 4 consecutive touchdown drives in between the end of the first half as they grounded out the entire time. They didn't get a lot of explosive plays here, but they relied on completely taking advantage of the short plays, turning into massive gains. They had Darnell Washington continuing to bully niggas, man. Like, you had Dotson, you had Davis trying to tackle him on a number of occasions, and he just flattened them out on the ground. There's nothing they can do about that. You had Kenneth Gainwell continuing to be a force both in and out of the backfield, and it would be Connor Hayward as well with their pseudo tush push getting into the end zone and also converting on multiple occasions for them to give the Steelers the lead at halftime. Then from there, it was just all them when it mattered. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, of all people, was able to get open as Melly Funwu, the safety for the Dolphins, just lost him in coverage. At least he caught the ball. But hey, the Rodgers to Valdes-Scantling connection, the former teammates from Green Bay, it would get it done to go up 14-30. Then this damn shit got me hyped the fuck up because they were driving again. Yeah, again, the game while continuing to contribute, bruh. And then this man, DK Metcalf, even without him getting fed that much in the ball game, yo, this play right here got me hyped up. And it was an impressive one from Aaron Rodgers all around as well. Because they mentioned how in post is, I was watching this live, and as they had the replay up, he does do his best to look off Ashton Davis. But Ashton Davis still reads it so well to where he nearly deflects the pass and gets a jump on it anyways. And if he was looking in that direction, it probably could have been intercepted. Instead, Ashton Davis proves to be just a touch off of where he needed to be in that moment. DK Metcalf got it anyways. And then it started to turn up field. Saw Micah Fitzpatrick in his sight. And what DK Metcalf do? He threw his fucking ass out of the way. Threw him away from him. Showing off the physicality that he possesses. Even better, he eludes Trader Jr., one of the other guys. Gets him away from him. And Micah Fitzpatrick tries to get himself back into the play. Get the fuck off me. Got right in there for a mammoth of a catch and run touchdown score from 28 yards out to make that 21-3. And at that point, it already felt like it was going to be done. As they literally said, The Steelers defense had been holding up so well, playing like the most expensive defense in the league for one of the first times this season. And this could be legitimate against a team who, maybe the Dolphins weren't necessarily turning the ball over like the Colts were, but they were a team that had been riding high somewhat in their past few games. They certainly, in more ways than one, cooled down. Facts. Completely cooled down. Were nowhere to be found. And the Steelers would once again get themselves down the field, honestly, with just some stupid shit. I ain't even gonna lie. Like, they were stopped initially on this drive after some solid defense. If you are Miami in that situation, all you got to do is make the tackle, stop them short. You know they're not going to go for it in their own territory, deep in their own territory like that. Get off the field, give your offense a chance to do something. Instead, Jordan Brooks decided that it was a good idea to start taunting and talking shit as if he wasn't down by 18 points already. And they got his ass for taunting, extending the drive, and ultimately allowing the Steelers to get a touchdown, this time with Johnny Smith getting schemed up the ball on numerous occasions, getting a rushing touchdown for the first time since 2020 when he was with the Titans, to give the Steelers a 28-3 lead. Click off the video, Falcons fans. You know what's good for you. Yeah, just ridiculousness, man. There was no reason for that to be done, and yet you decided to. I don't even give a shit about the Dolphins getting these 2 touchdown drives late, even though you do respect Darren Waller for getting multiple touchdowns in a game. It wasn't worth it, because when it mattered, man, you have a couple of other nuggets here. In the third quarter, the Dolphins accounted for negative 20 net yards. And to this point, even with not really having to face all that on those subsequent drives, the Dolphins went on a streak and continued a streak where they ended up being 0-17 in 10 plus downs in that span. Now, granted, that last one might not have been controlled. Westbrook-Akina might have gotten injured on the play. So you can't really put too much stock there, but they were just inept for most of the night offensively when it mattered. And now, when the game is pretty much out of reach, you want to show up late. Even then, the tempo was still off. Because I don't know what it was. Even as they were driving down and getting these plays in, I'm confused. Because are you trying to get quick scores, or are you trying to drown the clock out? Because they weren't moving with enough urgency at all on the first one, but then decided to pick it up on the next one. Like they could possibly make anything happen from there. I will say things could have gotten a little interesting if Adam Thielen had managed to completely botch this onside kick. But, hey, they ended up downing it anyways, and were fortunately able to get back on the ball to just close the game out from there. Like, I just, man, solid win for the Steelers to get them the 28-15 victory and move them to 8-6, while also giving them their 23rd consecutive win for the Steelers on Monday Night Football at home. Since 1991. They would also briefly take the lead for the most Monday Night Football wins all time with 55, although it's worth noting that they had previously broken the tie with the 49ers, who will face off against the Colts on Monday Night Football next week. So, could very much have to revert back to that and mention how it's a tie in a foot race in that aspect anyways. Next week. Nevertheless, man, just completely atrocious play from the Dolphins' perspective. To add even more insult to injury, they'd never done good in the third quarter anyways, and that should continue. They had just 27 points in that third quarter period throughout the entire season, which is tied for the fewest in the NFL with the Raiders. And we'll get to the fucking Raiders in a second. Aaron Rodgers in this game played great, though. 224 yards, 25.2% completion, and 2 touchdowns. He may very well be starting to find it, and even he said as such, with these new acquisitions potentially giving them new life here. He would also, with that, notch his 166th career game with at least 2 passing touchdowns, which is the third most all-time in NFL history. The Steelers ran the ball pretty well. Had 135 yards as a team on 4.2 yards per carry. But it was Kenneth Gainwell stealing the show, quite literally. He had 20 total touches for 126 yards in this game, 80 rushing, and just continued to be serviceable as a receiving back to give Aaron Rodgers easy outlets, especially when it came to potential blitzes. DK Metcalf had 3 receptions for 55 yards and a touchdown, while Pat Freiermuth had 3 receptions for 45 yards. As for the Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa, 253 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception on 78.6% completion. That don't tell you the full story. And, man, if he was truly playing up to that standard for the entirety of the night, I'm telling you, this game would have been much closer than it actually was and that it actually felt like. They also tailed off completely with protecting and giving enough rushing lanes to Devon Achane, although he would finish with a total of 18 touches for 127 yards. Darren Waller had 7 receptions for 66 yards and 2 touchdowns as well, while Jordan Brooks and Tyrell Dotson both had over 10 tackles, and Jordan Brooks had 2 TFLs, along with Patrick Queen getting 10 tackles and 2 TFLs. And man, I'll get to other developments of that front tomorrow. But boy, let's just say for now, especially with some of the news that had recently come in, oh boy, I think the Dolphins may very well be in a situation where they're starting to admit some regret about a few things. The Steelers, though, they are trending in the right direction. They still have to tough it out in what is going to be a chaotic AFC North battle. But they get themselves a crucial win and manage to take control of it briefly. So, hey, the ball is definitely in their court. But that'll do it for all the game action that I watched. And to get into other general action throughout the week. All of these, in their own respective rights, could genuinely be melt sessions, depending on how you frame it. Every single one of them. Because pretty much all of the ones that I did not watch live ended up being blowouts. And it starts with this Bears-Browns game. Another game played in very wintry style weather. And the Bears, even though, the Browns are still kind of accustomed to that kind of quality themselves, the Bears are on a completely different plane, and they shellacked the hell out of this Browns team. It's crazy to think that the Browns, Bears right now, have control of the NFC North. This team, for all the shit that they've been through over the past few seasons, this team has the division lead as we speak. And they will face off against the Packers again on Saturday. They're going to need to win that game. But man, they're looking like they are on a fucking roll. I mean, some of the stuff that I saw in post, it was an absolute needle threader of a pass from Caleb Williams over to DJ Moore for that touchdown to make it, 21-3 at that time. That was an impressive fucking play. And they've got everything going for them. You want to talk about full balance. I averaged 4.3 yards per carry as a squad and had 142 yards on the ground, with DeAndre Swift looking as though he's turned it around. 18 rushes and 98 yards for him, along with 2 scores. And these weren't just, little chip runs either. No, they were actually some pretty strong totes. He was actually getting physical with the defense in throwing multiple people off of him. And that's a stark contrast to see for him specifically. Caleb Williams in this game had 2 touchdown passes and 242 yards, 160.7% completion. Luther Burden III had 6 receptions for 84 yards, and DJ Moore had 4 receptions for 69 and 2 touchdowns, while Colson Loveland had 4 receptions for 63 yards. The Browns, we know what the Browns are at this point. And I'm not that surprised to see that you would have them struggle against such a stout Bears defense. But even then, you're looking for something, anything at that point. And the Browns couldn't contribute much of anything. Shedeur Sanders did have 177 passing yards on 51.4% completion with 3 interceptions. Also led the team in rushing, which is a problem yet again. It's also worth noting that for one of the interceptions that I saw in post, Jerry Jeudy had a great chance to catch that for what would be a touchdown, and it was ripped right from out of his hands by Jalen Johnson. On another front, it has been mentioned at several times to me that Shedeur Sanders was given the wrong wristband with different play calls on them. Typically you'd have, in the same kind of area on like their forearm, different quarterbacks have different pads with given play sheets on them so that they can have a direct reference to what exactly it is they might be trying to run, instead of having to go over to the sideline and waste time after timeout on multiple occasions trying to get the play call right. All of that has to deal with making things more accessible and trying to manage the game in a more efficient way. Because, you already have the earpiece that, certain core players on offense and defense are given to hear calls come through and just get as much dialogue as possible in terms of what exactly they're trying to incorporate on a given play. But you also have those that kind of feel the same need. And if that is true, and it's not something that I heavily looked into, I can't say that they're true. I can't really say that they're unfounded assumptions either. I really don't know. So to do with that what you will, but this was still an all-around terrible game for the front as a whole. Isaiah Bond had 2 receptions for 89 yards, and Harold Fannin Jr. had 7 receptions for 48 yards. Carson Schlesinger continues to cook up, though, with 14 tackles and another 10-tackle performance for him. And Myles Garrett is getting ever so close. He is just 1.5 sacks away now after reaching 21.5 from breaking the fucking record. He's that close. I've already made my point about him. Again, he could very well get it, and he'd be well deserving of it. But the team is far from a contender, and no matter how much he tries to get frustrated about it, he made the decision to rejoin this team in the offseason, despite having massive opportunities to just go to a contender. Moving on to the Cardinals and the Texans. The very first play saw Nico Collins get a 57-yard touchdown catch. And the second that happened, I knew that this was going to go bad for the Cardinals again. But you could also pencil them in for it. This is literally yet another time in the past few weeks where they have not only gotten blown out, but have lost by 20 points or more. And it's in some of those same infuriating ways for them specifically. Like, even if Michael Wilson had a little bit of a down week, that's whatever. You still have Trey McBride going for 12 receptions and 134 yards and 2 touchdowns to become the first tight end in NFL history to post back-to-back 100-catch seasons ever. And it still didn't matter for them. They still can't run the football themselves, averaging just 3 yards a carry and rushing for 72 combined. Their overall defense is just taking a massive step back. You know, they'd had some good contributions, but ultimately that Texans offense proved to be a little too dynamic for them to deal with, as Nico Collins would go for 3 receptions and 85 yards and 2 touchdowns, while Dalton Schultz would have 8 receptions for 76 yards and a touchdown. You know, the Texans defense is still just, man, they're so damn good. Azeez Al-Shire and Henry To'oTo'o would both have greater than 10 tackles. While To'oTo'o would also add a TFL. They had 2 sacks in this game and also 4 TFLs, while having Jamar Laster force another interception and 2 pass deflections along with blocked tackles. Man, hey, bro. Shit. I think the most revealing thing about this for the Cardinals, yes, you have now gotten blown out again. They are so far out of the picture, and this is just going to be another dud of a season for them, even though they've already declared a few things about their potential future with potentially getting Kyler Murray out of there. I don't even think any of that compares, though, to having a player by the name of Jawar Jordan for the Texans, who had been called up from the practice squad for this game, who had not really gotten as much burn in the NFL. This was going to be his first true start, and he came in and he ran for 101 yards and 15 carries, to the point where he outgained the Cardinals as a whole and has now warranted himself an extension on the roster as he got called back up to there just today per an NFL insider. You know, you have to respect that from his perspective. It's definitely been a long time coming from him, and he's more than earned his right to go out in the NFL and put what he's got to offer on display. I can't hate on that at all. But if you are the Cardinals, you have to be severely disappointed in yourself. Because how the fuck, from your perspective, do you let him walk in there and do that to your defense? It's fucking wild, man. It's like they were literally the team who could not win one-score games themselves this season. And now you're just getting shellacked in a multitude of ways. And then this damn game. The fucking Raiders promptly got by the Eagles in what was seen as a get-right game. You absolutely had no choice but to do it. And they promptly made that happen. This is the Jalen Hurts that we'd been waiting on for such a while. Although, again, yet another unconventional way to get it done. It's conventional for the Eagles. But this is the third time this week that a team would win a game with a quarterback attempting fewer than 20 passes. Jalen Hurts had as many touchdown passes as incompletions and had 175 yards on 80% completion, also accounting for 39 yards on the ground. Saquon Barkley wasn't as efficient as you would like him to be, but he had 78 rushing yards and a touchdown as well. And the team as a whole ran the ball 47 times, tied for their most since 2021, and 183 yards as well. Dallas Goedert got in 6 catches for 70 yards and a couple of very short touchdown scores. Devontae Smith had 2 receptions for 50 yards, and A.J. Brown had 2 receptions for 41 yards and a score. Now, again, it's the Raiders. You can really try whatever you want to on them, and you are not going to find a whole hell of a lot of deterrence there. It is just how they are. But, hey, at some point, sooner rather than later, you would much rather them go out and attempt to get this thing figured out than continue to carry these struggles into the later stretch of the season, into potential postseason play. So, if you're an Eagles fan, you're not going to be as happy with the win, but you will certainly take it. You understood what this was coming into it. So, there's some credit there. But the fucking Raiders, on the other hand. I mean, I literally sound like a broken record at this point. And crazy enough, Devin White, man. Hey, I saw something from Ian Rappaport essentially stating that he is in conversations for comeback player of the year, and that makes sense. Devin White would have himself another monster game, getting 16 tackles in 2 TFLs. In fact, if he gets just a few more tackles, he will be the second player since 2019 to have at least 700 tackles and 25 sacks, along with Demario Davis. That's pretty good territory to be in. This has been a hell of a season for him. You know, this man was literally just out of the league a few years ago. Scratch that, literally a year ago, in some cases. And what do you know? He's back in the league, getting 149 tackles on the year, an interception, and a sack. Like, that's honestly fucking impressive. And that deserves respect, yet that's still being wasted by the ineptitude of this fucking offense. Even Isaiah Polamalu had 10 tackles as well. It don't fucking matter. Like, 15 of 25 passing for 64 yards for Kenny Pickett and an interception. 2.6 yards per pass attempt. They still can't run the ball. That literally sounded like a broken record at that point. It's just, it's bad for this team right now, man. It truly is. There are very few redeeming qualities about them at this point. And that's why they are down here with the fucking Giants in the first place. It's absolutely fucking ridiculous. Don't get me started on this shit. You want to talk about guys being that invested in fantasy, man. Look, bro. If you had either of Trevor Lawrence or Travis Etienne on your team, you were definitely happy. If you are a Jags fan, you may still be feeling happy, even though this is the fucking Jets you beat. But this Jets defense, a Jets defense that still has yet to force a turnover in terms of an interception on the entire season and have just 3 to this point. They managed to allow someone who came into this game fairly turnover prone, consistently throwing interceptions in Trevor Lawrence over the past few games. They allowed this man to play the best football game of his career, accounting for 6 total touchdowns, 381 total yards on 62.5% completion. They also allowed Travis Etienne Jr. to go off for 15 touches and 105 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. He was so damn effective, every single one of his catches resulted in touchdowns. And they weren't all checkdowns. One came from incredibly deep. Still got wide open and into the end zone for a score. For Trevor Lawrence, not only did you get a career day from him, but he also put up the most fantasy football points by any quarterback in by and large, any player with that logic in the season this year at damn near 58 by himself. Absolutely gaudy numbers there. And that's what this Jets defense has become. They were literally so feared a few seasons back. And even when, they figured the offense wasn't going to do that well. I mean, you can't be surprised at having Brady Cook go in his first action against such a stout unit on the Jaguars side and struggle. That's not that surprising. But, I mean, damn, you at least, given the, status that they've had over the past couple seasons, you at least expected this defense to come through and perform. And they just have completely fallen off a cliff. Completely. It's fucking terrible, man. It is flat out terrible. Like, I don't even feel a need to read off all the numbers. You lose a game by 28 fucking points to this Jaguars team. I mean, hey, Jags with that, they notched their 10th win of the season. It's a solid one for them. And they seem to be trending in the right direction, despite knowing that they as well have to face off against AFC South competition over the past few weeks of the season. But, man, if they can keep it up and they can keep it consistent against better opponents, more quality opponents than the Jets, they could very well be just fine in the overall playoff race. The AFC South is getting tough, even though they, with that win, would take control of the division, temporarily at least, barring any other craziness. So, there you go there. That's pretty damn interesting. Again, I don't think anyone would see that coming, but here we are. For this game, the Panthers and the Saints. I can't explain to you how the Panthers lost this game. I just can't. But shout out to Charlie Schmidt for getting the game-winning field goal here to give the Saints the 20-17 win. I just don't understand, though. Seriously. It's like they had the advantage. They were up by 17, they were up 17-7 after a Jalen Coker 32-yard touchdown catch. And then afterwards, they just completely tailed off. You're talking about multiple punts, a turnover on downs mixed in here. Like, geez. And then, fittingly enough, a fumble to cap off the game entirely. I ain't mad that the Ohio State man in Pete Werner eventually recovered it. I ain't mad at that at all. But it's like, you seeing on Thursday that you had a chance to take at least a game advantage ahead of the Bucs that are now spiraling out of control. Like, that was your moment right there to strike and pounce on the opportunity to become the division leader. And you failed it. Making sure that, again, for you to try to assume it as well, you now have to beat the Bucs. Maybe that doesn't seem that hard given the slide, but they are also now back somewhat at full strength. And at some point, they may be motivated enough to want to turn this thing around and stop completely sliding down in the standings and in their record. So it's going to get incredibly spicy there. The setup is going to be immaculate. As for the Saints, man, like, okay. For the numbers, Tyler Shuck had 272 passing yards on 75% completion and a touchdown, while also leading the team in yards on the ground with 32. Devin Neal had a rushing touchdown. Chris Olave had 6 receptions for 85 yards and a touchdown. Davon Vele had 5 receptions for 69 yards. Aldrick Estime had 3 receptions for 39 yards. And Kevin Austin Jr. had 3 receptions for 33 yards as well. Man, they got to get some more weapons in New Orleans, of course. Like, that is just, oh, man. Back to where they were last year, but hey, they managed to thug it out for the win anyways. As for the Panthers, Bryce Young had 163 passing yards on 62.5% completion and a touchdown. Rico Donnell and Bryce Young both had 49 rushing yards, and Donnell had a rushing touchdown. Jalen Coker had 4 receptions for 60 yards in the aforementioned touchdown. Xavier Leggett had 2 receptions for 39 yards. And Nick Scott had 10 tackles. So that's solid. And for the final game here, one that would essentially be a blowout, although the 49ers actually allowed them to keep this close. The 49ers would get the upper hand on the Titans, winning 37-24. For a while, they had actually just completely stalled out. But they were able to pick it back up in reasonable time and were afforded to because of the ineptitude of the Titans themselves to ultimately win the game. The best highlight for the Titans, man, them also being a 2-12 squad, but their best highlight literally came from Jeffrey Simmons III, of all people, accounting for a receiving touchdown. In fact, he became, if I'm not mistaken, the first person since 2014 to account for both a fumble recovery and a receiving touchdown in the same game. I would have to believe that was J.J. Watt, seeing as they used him at a tight end on several occasions in that season alone. And he was still wrecking the game to a point where I think he got MVP consideration that year, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, we're throwing it back to that. You have to credit Jeffrey Simmons for doing so. I mean, he deserves it, working that hard on the defense. Because you could make the argument that no one else really was doing all that much. They allowed the 49ers to go damn crazy on offense. Brock Purdy had a total of 339 yards and 3 touchdowns on 76.7% completion, while Christian McCaffrey added 22 rushes and 73 yards along with a touchdown on the ground. He actually, surprisingly enough, didn't get utilized all that much in the receiving game. He had just a single catch. And that's a little surprising for me to see. I'm not going to lie. Like, that's going to take me by surprise. I mean, fuck, nigga. Ricky Pearsall had 6 receptions for 96 yards. George Kittle had 8 receptions for 88 yards and a touchdown. Jaywan Jennings had 3 receptions for 37 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Marcus Robinson had 2 receptions for 36 yards. As for the Titans, Cam Ward had 170 yards and 2 touchdown passes on 62.1% completion. Tony Pollard had 14 rushes for 104 yards and a touchdown. And the Titans ran relatively well on the ground, getting 136 on 6.8 yards per carry. But that would be far from enough. Gunnar Helm would have 4 receptions for 49 yards and a touchdown, while Van Jefferson would have a reception for 43 yards. Chigotsi Okonkwo would also have 4 receptions for 33 yards in this game as well. And with Gray as well, credit to this person, getting 16 tackles in a game, but once more falling far short of where they needed to be in this game in order to win. And with that, that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.